Tennis coaches, do your players struggle in matches? Tennis players, do you find that when it gets close or tight in a match, you struggle to finish the match off? Tennis parents, do you find that your players or children get highly emotional when they play the game? Well, welcome to the My Tennis Coaching Podcast. We are live, as always, on YouTube, Monday morning, 10 a.m. London time. And today's podcast, we are going to discuss mental resilience or mental skills, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of different names and stuff for it. And I hope you're all well. And we're going to discuss the importance of mental skills today. And for me, it's one of the most common questions I get asked by tennis coaches, by parents. Why can my player perform, or why can I perform really well in a match, but then, why can I perform really well in practice, but then in a match I fall apart? And I'm going to unpack sort of what I believe are the three key reasons and why we get practice so wrong. And I mentioned this on the podcast on the talent equation a few weeks ago with Stuart Armstrong. I think sometimes we coach ballet, great moves and this great technique, but then a tennis match is a bit like a one-on-one combat. It's a bit like a mixed martial arts fight. And because we train in a very specific way to develop technique, a tennis match is so variable and so chaotic that sometimes doesn't really match up. So that's the plan of the podcast today. I hope you're all well. Feel free, if you are watching live on the stream, to leave some questions in the chat, and I'll sort of have a pause halfway through and I'll answer any questions that may come up. If you are watching a replay, please leave a comment down below. I had some great comments this week on YouTube. So at the end of the podcast, we're going to look at some interesting comments that I've received this week. Some nice comments, but there's a couple of interesting ones as well. So I think I'll start doing that each and every week on the podcast, sort of just looking at previous comments and sometimes challenges from other coaches, which is quite interesting as well. But we do have quite a few people joining us. If you are joining us live, please do feel free to say hello in the chat, where you're from. And yeah, we're going to get into it. So these are the three things that I think are huge barriers for players when they play: the fear of failure, negative self-talk, and an over-focus on outcomes. So I've been lucky because I've worked in this space now for 24 years, and I've worked with, at this point, thousands of competitive players. So players who compete quite regularly. And these are probably the three most common areas that I work with or work on with players. I think first and foremost, one of the biggest problems coaches have is they disconnect mental skills or psychological skills from practice. They really focus on the tactics and the technique. But what we have to understand is that we are a human being, where we are a dynamical system. Everything that we do is driven by our emotions generally. And if we're in an anxious or nervous state, it affects how we move. It also affects our decision making, how we perceive the world. And a lot of the time, we almost try and teach players like robots. If we just teach you a technique, and if we repeat it enough, it will just happen in a match. The old myth of muscle memory: if you just repeat it 10,000 plus times, it just becomes automatic. Again, Fitz and Posner, quite outdated skill acquisition research in 2025. But the problem is, like, we are humans. We get nervous, we get anxious. And when we are nervous and anxious, it really affects our movement. It affects our decision making. It affects our perception. And one of the most common things to think about as tennis coaches, especially with players, is when a player is nervous, their field of perception gets lower. It gets smaller. Therefore, they take in less information. If they take in less information, therefore, they're not going to see as many opportunities or affordances. They're also going to see the ball out when sometimes it's in. And sometimes they're going to see the ball in when it's out, because their field of perception is so narrowed because they're so anxious and nervous. When a player is feeling confident and they're feeling in the flow, the field of perception widens. They take in more information. Things start to slow down. And we've all had that experience as players ourselves, that feeling of, oh, I just can't miss today. The ball seems a million. The ball seems like a beach ball. And that's because your emotional state is allowing you to take in more information. So I think that's the first thing that I'll sort of highlight, is we need to understand that we are humans. And there's days where I go into work and I'm tired and I'm stressed. That affects how I behave. My behavior then affects how I play. And I think sometimes as tennis coaches, we just, especially with the kids, we believe that we can just train them like robots and they can just perform magically. So these are the three things we're going to sort of unpack and sort of go through. And we're just going to go through each one really. So the fear of failure, and I've done a few videos on the channel on the fear of failure quite a lot. And it's one of the most common things that I see as a coach when I go to tournaments. Players playing safe, players not wanting to lose. Therefore, they're not trying to win. It almost becomes a survivalship battle of, okay, who can keep the ball in? Who takes the least amount of risk? And you'll see just lots of up and down the middle hitting, or just endless cross-court rallies where players are just too frightened to take risks and change direction. And there's a few things in which we can look for to see if a player has a fear of failure. I think the first thing I'd look at is if they're really good in practice. So if they're dominating in practice and they're absolutely amazing, but then when you go and watch them play tournaments, they're not the same player. For me, that's a fear of failure, because they can perform when there's no pressure and in practice and it's all fluffy and nice. But when they're in the heat of the battle, if they can't perform the same behaviors and actions under challenge, then they are scared of losing. It becomes that fear of failure. And another common thing that I see with a lot of players who have a big fear of failure is they avoid competition. So if you say to them, okay, we're going to play some matches today, you get that, oh, really? Really? Are we actually going to play matches? Oh, I don't want to play matches today. Oh, I'm injured. Oh, I've got a slight injury today. Or if you ask them to, like, can you go and play a competition? It's, oh, I don't know, I might be busy. And I've seen this quite a lot with some good players where they don't want to play competition. Oh, yeah, I really don't want to play, but they enjoy going to training. So again, for me, that is one of the common signs of this player has a fear of failure. And another one is just they just want to drill. They just want to hit. Okay, can we just hit today, or can we just do drills today? I don't want to serve. I don't like serving. Again, these are just common sort of things over the years that I've seen with players who are scared of losing. They literally have a fear of failure. And I think a big part of that, and we'll unpack some of these a little bit later on, especially when it comes to outcomes, a lot of this is coach driven. So when we coach players, we coach him, again, very technical and tactical within sessions, but we don't relate it. We don't couple it to the actual match. We just drill what a perfect forehand may look like. And what tends to happen with a lot of these players, especially when they get good, normally a fear of failure comes in with your better players, but also it can happen at any level. But what tends to happen is they just link winning to their self-worth. So if they don't win, they don't think they're very good at tennis. If they don't win, they believe their parents aren't happy. If they don't win, they believe their coach is upset with them. And parents don't help with this either, because a lot of the time, if you look on social media, when parents are putting Instagram posts of Steve won the grade 3 at Batchwood this weekend, and there's a picture of me, my little medal, looking really happy. But then if I lose the next week at Heston and there's no picture, well, as a child, I'm thinking, well, I only get a picture on Instagram and I get praise and I get this adulation if I win. If I don't win, mum or dad or whoever doesn't put a picture up. So then they start to link winning to their self-worth. Well, if I don't win, my parents aren't happy. And again, when you don't win, and the parents at the back and they're rolling their eyes and they're going, oh my God, I can't believe you lost that match. It links self-worth to winning. And the same as coaches as well. If we constantly tell our players how proud we are when they win and how happy and how much hard work they've put in, and we overemphasize the winning, we're just putting self-worth on winning. So it's something that we've got to take into consideration when working with especially children. Like, kids will link self-worth to winning, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on. We're focused on outcome, but like, more often than not, you lose in tennis. And sometimes the reality of the game is not presented to children, and they just think winning is everything and they have to win. And even though you may say winning's not important, like, it is. Like, you can't say winning's not important, but there are alternatives to winning. You don't have to win the match to win the battle, for example. So I think a couple of examples of how I would tackle this. Number one, everything has to be competitive in your sessions. If you make competition the norm, if you make losing normal, if you make winning normal, then you won't have this fear of failure. So in my sessions, again, not saying that I'm the greatest tennis coach in the world and you should copy me, But our warm up is competitive. If I'm doing an individual lesson with you this evening, after you've done your physical prep in terms of your physical warm up, when we get on court, okay, we're competitive in the boxes. We're competitive from the baseline. There's no let's hit for 10, 15 minutes and get all right in. It's let's just play. Because like, why would you rally for 10, 15 minutes and then make it competitive? It makes no sense to me. Again, you're changing the dynamic. And I don't believe all this rubbish about, oh, I need repetition first. I need to build my confidence up first, because it's fake confidence. Yes, you may hit 15 minutes, but then once I win that first point, that confidence is shaking. So I may as well make it competitive from the start. So every practice, every drill, every whatever you want to call it, game you play has to be competitive. Now that doesn't have to be competitive against other players. I think sometimes there's too much of that as well. You can just compete against yourself. Okay, so in this first practice, let's see what score you get. Let's repeat the practice, and your challenge is, can you beat your previous score? And I think sometimes with competition, it doesn't always have to be one-on-one competition. You can make the player compete against themselves. And some things we'll talk about in this podcast is half the battle is you're competing against yourself. You're trying to deal with your own inner self. And I think if you can sort of get used to competing against yourself, and we'll look at process versus outcome a little bit later on, but everything has to be competition. The second thing I think we can do to combat fear of failure is we can really reframe how we have conversations with players. So rather than saying, why did you miss that shot? You could say, what could you learn from that shot? Because we need to miss to learn. Missing, losing, missing, whatever you want to call it. It's such a huge part of learning. We need to hit the ball out so the body can recalibrate itself to try and find a more effective movement solution. We need to make errors. We have to act to perceive. We have to take action to then get a better understanding and perception in the world. So we need to miss. So rather than saying, why did you miss that shot? What can you learn from that shot? Just reframing how we word things. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about this in the self-talk bit. But just reframing how we communicate with players. Like, I can't believe you missed, could be turned into, I really like the intention on that last shot. So if you've gone for the winner down the line and you just quite haven't executed it right, don't say, oh, how did you miss? It's, I love the intention. And again, this is not making it all fluffy and the players can't miss, but like, we need to miss. And we need to get away from this whole idea of tennis is a perfect game. Tennis is the most imperfect game. If you watch a documentary on breakpoints, all the pro players talk about is losing and how they have to deal with losing every single day. Tennis is so unique because you lose a lot in tennis. In a tennis match, you're losing points all the time. You're dealing with failure in your eyes all the time. So I think how we sort of reframe failure is really key. It's not a failure. It's a lesson. It's an opportunity for the body and the human to recalibrate. I'm going to keep looking down because I've got some notes, and that brings me into the reality of the game. Djokovic win percentage points wise 51% ish, 52% sometimes, but in and around 51-52%. So over the course of a year, most pro players are losing 49% of the points. You go to any tournament and a player loses 1 point, and it's the end of the world. They just can't believe that they've missed a shot. And this, again, I think is down to the coaching. If in coaching, when players miss, we constantly intervene and tell them how to fix it, they just associate missing to failure. Because if they miss and they're told how to improve, it's a failure in their eyes. But like I just said, we need to miss. We have to miss. Missing is so important. And I've done sessions where I deliberately make my players miss. I want them to overhit the ball. I want them to underhit the ball. Why? Because I'm trying to give them the range of motion that the body can use. I want them to make mistakes. They have to make mistakes. And I think the reality of the game is you miss all the time. To win a match, you've just got to win just over 50% of your points. And because we coach in a way in which it's about perfection and perfect and right and wrong and winning and consistency. Consistency is one of the worst words in the world of tennis, because consistency means winning 51% of your points or making 51 out of 100 shots. You're being consistent in a tennis place. It's not, you've got to make 80-90% of your shots. Even first serve percentage at a pro level are in around 70%. They're missing 30%. That's really consistent. But then we teach in a way where players can't miss, players can't make mistakes. They have to be consistent. They have to get the ball in. They have to make one more shot. And then we wonder why when we go to competitions, these players aren't taking risks. They're playing down the middle. They're hitting the ball endlessly cross court. They're not changing direction. Why? Because that's how you train. And again, 50 shots cross court. What's the point in that? Oh, you've got to make 50 before we can do anything else. Why? Because you're never going to rise to 50 in a match. You're never going to make 50 shots cross court. Goes back to this stupid old age thing of muscle memory. If I repeat it enough, it becomes autonomous. The human body doesn't work that way. And it's until I started looking at ecological dynamics and ecological psychology and dynamical systems theory that I understand that the body just adapts to what's in front of it. It doesn't store memory. It doesn't remember movement. It just adapts to the situation, to the task, to the environment, to its own individual constraints. It doesn't recall. So getting players to be consistent is crazy. And one thing that I now praise my players for is taking risks. And I almost go down the Cobra Kai route. Strike first, strike hard. Like, you don't wait for your opponent to miss. You make them miss. You try and make them miss. I don't care if you nail one down the line and it goes wide. I'd rather you do that than rally 40 shots cross court. And again, that's just my own philosophy. Like, I'm a strike first, strike hard, Cobra Kai type of coach. Like, you've got to take risks. And if you look at the best players in the world, they take risks all the time. They're always looking to win. They're not looking not to lose. And even the best players in the world, just listen to the press conferences. They come out and go, yeah, know what? I really tried my best to win today. I didn't quite get the win, but I'm happy the way I played. Whereas most of our players, they just don't want to lose. They have that fear of failure. So that's the first one. And I think to me, it's the sort of most common one, that fear of failure. So again, as always, if you are listening live, please do feel free to leave a question or comment in the chat. I will answer them as I go through. If you are watching it on the replay, feel free to leave it in the comments as well. And I'll try and reply to it either directly in the comments or I'll reply to it next week on the stream. So number 2, let me take a sip. It's like my new cup, by the way. It's quite cool. So number 2 is just negative self-talk. And this is a really common one with players. Oh, I'm rubbish. Oh, I'm not playing well today. Oh, I can't get a forehand in the court. And it's tough because it's just a way of player of expression, emotion. Tennis is a highly emotional game. Like I mentioned in the fear of failure part, you're constantly winning, constantly losing. So you've got to deal with that as a player. And a couple of things that you may notice with players is body language. Like 1 minute, they're absolutely bouncing and flying around. Then all of a sudden, the shoulders slump and the head goes down and they're not looking around. Even though they might not be verbalizing what they're feeling, they're probably talking quite negatively about themselves. I can't serve. I can't get a serve in. My serve is rubbish. And we know this as coaches because we all go through that process at some point as well. And it's quite damning. Another sort of common indicator of a player is negative is they're constantly looking at the coach for help or looking at the parent. So if a player makes a mistake, they'll turn around and look at the coach or look at the parent. Now, the reason for that is generally when players make a mistake, the coach or parent gives advice. They tell them how not to make the mistake. But we just talked about why mistakes are so important and the fact that the player needs to self-organize and self-reflect. There's no point me giving the player the answer or the parent giving the player the answer, because the truth of the matter is we don't actually know. As a coach, I don't really know why you missed, because there's something in the environment that's made you take action in that way. Unless you tell me and unless you know what it was in the environment that made you act in that way, I've only got an opinion. And you might not know what sort of influenced you. So my job as a coach is to guide you to certain information or certain things that might give you the right answer. Parents generally have no clue. They've got less clue than I have. So when parents are giving, I see it all the time, and parents are going, hit it higher, more topspin, go down the line. You're just making things worse because you're giving solutions that, one, probably aren't correct. 2, you're now also sort of developing a reliance on the player, on you. And that's not going to help them in a match because, again, tennis is so quick and dynamic that they can't listen to all the information you're giving them and then actually put it into action because we don't work that way. Again, dynamical systems. So when players are constantly looking at coaches and parents, they literally have no clue how to solve the problem. But also, again, they don't have the confidence that they can't solve the problem themselves. And one of the common feedbacks I see a lot of coaches give when they come back from tournaments is, oh yeah, they're just not very good at solving problems. You know what? They're not very good at making decisions. And you look at the sessions that these coaches are running, and the coach makes all the choices. The coach does all the interventions. The coach does all the feedback. And then you wonder why these players can't make decisions and problem solve in real time in a match because they're so reliant on you. And again, with coaches, when players miss, coaches again jump in, give feedback, and it's normally negative. So therefore, the player thinks they're rubbish. So as soon as a player misses, they think that they believe they're rubbish. They believe there's something to fix. And I had it yesterday. I was doing a doubles workshop yesterday at a club, and a young girl was playing. She's 16 and playing with a group of adults, which is quite a pressurized situation anyway. And she was making a few mistakes, and she kept saying sorry. And I stopped her and said, maybe it's just a good shot by your opponent. Like, just because you missed doesn't mean you've actually done a lot wrong. It might just be a really good shot by your opponent. Just because you missed doesn't mean like there's an awful lot wrong you could do. Obviously, there might be things that you could change to hopefully not miss, but maybe it's just a good shot. And again, goes back to you are allowed to miss. It's okay to miss. But again, if we keep jumping in with players, that's one of the problems. We keep jumping in with solutions and we keep saying, oh, your backhand's not very good today. Let's work on that. Well, that's no good, is it? Because when a player goes into a match, my backhand's not very good. It's just, we have to build confident young players who can problem solve and make decisions in real time. And it goes back to how we coach. We can't coach in a very 1980s style of, I'm just going to constantly fix errors. And you just become fix it Felix, I call it. You're just constantly trying to fix. But our job's not to fix, our job's to guide and allow players to explore. And it really frustrates me as a coach when I go to tournaments and players are looking around at me or at the parents. I don't give any information. Solve it yourself. Like, winning in this tournament is not the be all and end all. You need to learn how to fight yourself, basically. Like, there's no point me shouting answers at you. You can work it out yourselves. And I try and get my parents to do that as well. But again, parents just don't like seeing kids struggle. And I don't like seeing my players struggle as well. But parents jump in and they do what they call the helicopter parent. Like, I'll just jump in. I want to rescue. And if I give loads of information, then I'll save the kid. But then that just makes the self-talk even worse. Because it's like, oh, my parents aren't happy. Because if a parent's on the balcony and they're shadowing a serve, the child's looking and going, I've done that wrong because my mum or dad are telling me how to do it better. And it's not good. And again, it's one of the common reasons why our players are not very sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not very resilient because they're always constantly looking for people to help them out. And again, if they're really, really struggling and emotional, of course, I'm going to help a player out. I don't want them to suffer. But they're not really suffering. They're playing tennis. And I think for me, that's number one. And that then ties in with things like racket abuse and stuff. If players are banging rackets and throwing rackets, they just have, again, their self-worth comes into it. They just associate their self-worth. They can't handle missing. But then ask yourself a question as a coach. Is that on me? Are they always getting angry and wound up? Do they believe they have to be perfect because the way I coach? Because I'm always demanding, this is the level. This is what you need to do. This is the next level. Am I always comparing them to pro players? Am I always comparing them to their peers? Am I always trying to get them to be better and better and better and push him? And you may listen to that and go, oh yeah, but that's what we're meant to do to get into the next level. No, it's not. It's just an archaic way of thinking of coaching. Players will develop at their own speed. They need to miss. And again, this whole thing of you have to be at this level, it's a joke. and the coach will cause the problem. And it's interesting because coaches who coach that way, you'll notice that all their players are highly emotional. They can't deal with losing. They avoid competition and they'll start playing doubles because they want some support from another player. And coaches who work in the way, like we've talked about already on this podcast, all their players will act in the same way. And the coach will always blame the player. But maybe look at the coaching. Maybe look at if I've got 8 players who all act the same way, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the issue. Maybe I'm the problem. Rather than saying, well, these players just mentally weak, or blaming other things that might be going on in sort of personal life. At the end of the game, tennis is a sport, it's a game. And I think kids should be allowed to express themselves. So that's number 2, negative self-talk. And the third and final sort of barrier is a real over focus on outcomes. And we've touched upon this already before. Like, I think sometimes folks, just a focus on ratings and rankings is just bizarre in my mind, especially under 12. I get it from under 14, under 16, because then you're starting to think about, well, am I going to do this full time? Am I going to go to a full-time academy? I get it from 14 and 16. Under 12, why do we have ratings and rankings? What good does it do? Apart from create a highly pressurized parents and coach-led environment. Parents and coaches obsess over ratings and rankings, and that obsession then filters down to the players, and it's not healthy. I don't understand why we have ratings and rankings at under 12s. Now, I'm not saying don't have tournaments. Have tournaments. Let the players play lots of matches. Why do we need to put them into ratings and rankings? And you may say, yes, so then we get the better players playing the higher grades, and we don't want a beginner playing against a county level or national level player. I get that to a degree as well. But I don't think you need ratings and rankings published to do that. You could have ratings and rankings hidden behind the national governing body website. So you could have all their results hidden, so only the tournament organizer can see, so they can start putting players into different pots. You could then make your higher grade tournaments invitation only, but you don't publicize what you invite. Again, this is not my job. It's complicated, I understand. But there's lots of countries, again, Norway, great example. They don't have ratings and rankings. They don't have tournaments of winning and losing. They just play matches. They have festivals. I just don't think it's healthy. It's not healthy because you get parents going on and checking draws and then pulling players out in case certain players are in the draw. Like, how mental is that? What type of parent does that? It's just mad. Like, even when my girls play football, I don't even look at the league table to see where the opposition are. It makes no difference. It's kids' sport. And I put a post out today on Instagram, like, these are not tennis players. These are kids who play tennis. So they should be allowed to play tennis, not professionalize it. And, okay, we need to be top 10 in the county. We need to be top 10 nationally. And we do that with our goal setting as well. And I don't do it no more. And I used to do it. So this season, we're going to look to get top 4 county. We're going to maybe break in top 50 nationally, and we're going to get our rating from a 7.1 to a 6.2. Very outcome focused. But the problem is, it doesn't really matter. Like, if you're top 1 in nationally at under 12, doesn't mean you're going to be a tennis player at all. So why do we actually need them? And again, with players, like, winning the match shouldn't be the be all and end all. Winning a tournament shouldn't be the be all and end all. Again, we like winning. We like getting praise. We like getting trinkets of medals and little trophies. Like, we like that stuff. And I understand that as well. But there's different forms to winning. So now when my players go on and play matches, we have behaviors. So if you go on and you can be proactive in your play, and if you're proactive in your play for the vast majority of the match, that's a win. We're going to go out and you're going to go out and you're going to work on your second serve out to the backhand. So if you hit second serves out to your backhand more often than not, that's a win. And we have these behaviors, and when my players come off court, they'll have a little notebook and they'll mark off their behaviors. So let's say they have 3 behaviors in their match journal. If they tick off 2 of those behaviors, that's a win for us. That's a win. We've won that match, no matter what the outcome is. And even now, like, I don't even tell my players Or sorry, I don't even ask my players, "How'd you get on the weekend?" Or one, that's not what I asked. How'd you play? How'd you play this weekend? What went well this weekend? If you were to do the weekend again, would you try and do anything differently? I'm not interested in winning. I'm not interested in medals. I'm not interested in ratings and rankings because that stuff will look after itself later on when it matters. When they're trying to get into universities, when they're trying to get sort of the scholarship to America, or when they're trying to get into higher grade tournaments at under 12, I don't see the point. And I think that's a huge focus for us. We have to stop focusing on the outcome. And that goes back to training as well. So in training, okay, let's make 50 cross court outcome based. So what happens if I don't make 50? I feel like I can't do it. I feel like I'm rubbish. Why not say, okay, on this next, I don't know, next practice, can you give full commitment? So can you commit to every single shot? Okay, what does commitment look, feel, and sound like? To quote Mark Bennett, well, commitment will look like I'm increasing racket head speed. I'm not slowing the racket head speed down, Steve. Okay, let's do that then. Let's focus on the process. So if you increase your racket speed through this whole practice, we'll take that as a win. And what tends to happen now is the player gets success anyway because they're not focused about the outcome. Again, I joke on coach education. Did it at the weekend. Arteta, when he first went to Arsenal, let's focus on the process, and everyone made jokes out of it. But if we keep doing the right things, if we have the right behaviors more often than not, the outcome looks after itself at some point. And we just need to get away from this whole outcome based thing. And I understand that tennis is outcome based because if you hit a shot out, you lose, and that's final, and that is an outcome. If your opponent hits the shot out, you win. But I think there's different forms of winning. And like I mentioned before, you win 51% of your points in a match, you should win the match. Therefore, okay, well, let's just focus on the process because sometimes I can play my absolute best tennis and still lose because my opponent is just better than me. They've just got more experience. They're just in a better place that day. And there's days where I can play really bad and scrape a win. I think I'd rather, and I think Rafa says it himself, like he'd rather lose than win sometimes because you learn more from losing. Goes back to what I said before about missing. And I think sometimes coaches, parents, we protect our children and we put them in lower ranked tournaments so they win. We travel to the east of Scotland to play a grade 3 because we know that there's not going to be many players and we'll get a grade 3 win and a grade 3 points because we know that the level of player might not be as high, and we travel 8-9 hours in a car because we're just creating this false sense of winning and security. So I think for me, how I would tackle outcome goes back to what I said before. Rather than a coach intervening all the time when players miss, let the player reflect first. And I have a thing again taken from Mark Bennett: player first, coach second. So when I intervene, if I ever do, the player speaks first. The player gives their opinion. What happened? What influenced them? What did they see? Why did they make certain choices? How are they going to change it? And when they go through that process, normally I say, okay, let's go in. If I think they're way off base or I might have a slightly different opinion that might help them, I might give some information as well. So by having a player first, coach second, player last philosophy in terms of interventions and feedback, the player feels that they're in control. They're in control, and that will then reduce the fear of failure. It reduces the negative self-talk because they're looking at trying to be proactive and make better decisions. And it will also then take a focus off the outcome because we have to let these players find their own way. And sometimes as coaches, we jump in and we give too much information because we think that's our job. But like I said before, that we don't even know if it's the right information. I look at it from a 42-year-old, 24 years coaching, 10 years coach education. I'm looking at it from a different angle with a different game style. What I see and what the player sees are two completely different worlds. And my opinion probably isn't right. I might have a little bit of knowledge of, okay, what information the player could look towards, but I don't know if they should go line or cross in that moment. Only the player does. And I know that would probably freak a lot of coaches out because coaches, their ego takes over and think we know everything. We have all this knowledge, or I used to be an ex-player. Yeah, but you play based on your own personal individual constraints. The players are not you. The players are not me. And I think letting the player speak first will tackle a lot of these barriers that we have. And I think just having some time to reflect in between points as well. The issue with training is it's so fake because there's a great stat the LTA put out yesterday. In a match, the ball is in play for 20 minutes, which just blows my mind. Like 70 to 80% of a match is the ball's not in play. But then if you look at training, I would say the ball is in play an awful lot more. The problem with the ball being in play so much is there's no time to actually have a reflection. There's no time to almost reflect on what's just gone on or try and find different solutions. There's no time to problem solve because the next ball's in play straight away. Because again, coaches have this philosophy of volume. We need lots of hitting. Lots of volume means you get better, which again, it's a lot of rubbish. It's just muscle memory rubbish that doesn't exist. So how often do we train our players to take time between points? We see the top players do it all the time. They go to the back, they towel down, they'll do a little dance in the corner, probably doing some positive self-talk, probably doing some breathing exercise to try and calm. How often do we train that? How often do we train change of ends? Again, one thing I've been doing a lot in my sessions is a lot of my interventions are now done on the bench. So when we're changing ends, then I'll have a little chat with the player, and a little intervention. And my reason and my thinking behind it is, well, that's when a player needs to reflect when they're sitting on the bench or sitting on the chair, or when they're stood at the net post drinking water at the change of ends. So if I do my interventions at the change of ends, then when they're in matches, hopefully they're going to do the same thing. The same behavior start to come out. And just having those reflection moments, like we just don't do it as coaches. And one thing, again, I'm playing around with the moments is limiting the amount of tennis balls on the court. Because if I've got 60 tennis balls on the court, that next ball's in play relatively quick. If I've only got 3 tennis balls on the court and they're all down the server's end, like in a match, then it gives the player a more natural representative break in play where they can go through their little routines, whether it be fix the strings, breathing, reflection, off using offline information, pre-planning, whatever the player wants to do in that moment. But how often do we train that? Well, we don't, because we just focused on volume. We have baskets of 120 balls and there's 60 balls on the court, and the player can get a ball and get it in quick. But we're not giving them time to digest what's just happened. We're not giving them time to maybe look down the other end and take in information. Look at their opponent's body language. Are their opponents psyched up, or are they feeling nervous? It's just, yeah, how we, again, hopefully a common message in this podcast is like how we train and how we play matches are generally two separate things. And that's why we see what we perceive as mental weakness. It's not. We've just been training in a way that we're not giving the players the right opportunities to develop their psychological or mental skills alongside what we know are important physical, tactical, and technical skills as well. And I think for me, that's what it's about. It's just about setting the right environments up for players to develop these skills. And a lot of it, again, a lot of it I've put on the shoulders of a coach, because I think it is our job. Our job is to create the practice environment for the players to learn these things. And more often than not, our training environment doesn't match the match environment. We are training ballet, we're training moves, we're training repetition, we're training perfect situations, we're training perfect technique, we're training this idea of you can't miss. And then in a match, it's chaotic, it's uncomfortable, it's problem solving, it's decision making, it's playing really well 1 minute, and then all of a sudden you can't get a ball in the court because something's changed. It's having awareness of where yourself are as a player, your emotional state. Are you anxious? Are you nervous? Are you overexcited? Are you calm? Are you relaxed? Like, most of these players aren't very self-aware. Why? Because they're told how to behave. They're told what to think. They're told what to do, when to do it, and how to do it in training by coaches and by parents as well. And that's why we have this disconnect on a match court where players can't perform on a match court, because you've programmed them to behave and work in a completely different environment. And now you've got them in this highly variable, sometimes hostile environment. Because if I'm playing a match against you, I'm trying to beat you. But if I'm training with you, I'm working with you. And that's the disconnect. So it's not that these kids are mentally weak, not that they need to develop more resilience. We're not giving them opportunities to develop those skills within our practice design. We're just creating environments where players are allowed to believe that tennis is about not missing, to believe that tennis is about perfect technique. And when they do miss, there's someone there to support them and try and rescue them, whether that be a parent or a coach. But there we go. So hopefully they're the 3 mental barriers that players have within sessions, and they potentially will overcome. And I think for me, these are quite 3 key ones. If you can tackle these 3 as a coach, and I think in my work now, I would say I'm more focused on this than anything else. I'm probably 95% working on psychology of a player than tactics or technique. It's how can you perform your skill under pressure? How can you perform under match conditions? And again, a lot of my sessions, not saying I'm the greatest coach in the world, but a lot of my sessions, it's all points play. In my matches, in my lessons, we just play points all the time. Every single practice is points based. It generally always includes a serve and return, and I'll use various constraints. And people think, and I feel sometimes that I'm a bit of a fraud because I'm sometimes just playing tennis. I'm just playing tennis in lessons. But that's what the players will do in a match. They'll play tennis, and I'll use constraints to manipulate and develop certain skills, but it's always coupled with behaviors and how they behave on court. And I would like to say, and I'd hope if any of my players were to watch this, they would say, yeah, we don't have a fear of failure. We're not bothered if we miss because we know it's not the most important thing. My players are assertive. They're risk takers. They will look to find ways to win. They do not look to not lose. Most of my players are quite positive. Of course, they're going to have moments of self-talk and self-doubt and low confidence, but more often than not, they're quite positive. How do I know that? Because they smile and they have fun in sessions. That's sometimes quite demanding. There's a lot of losing in my sessions. There's a lot of problem solving. But if you watch the players, we do it in such a way that they're laughing and they're joking. And for me, that's what it's about. They're falling in love with playing the sport. They're not falling in love with coaching. They're not falling in love with cross the river or 54 hands cross. They're falling in love with normally a one-on-one competition. And we don't focus on outcomes. Outcomes are important, and we do tie outcomes in. But a big part of our work and my players is we work on the process. To quote Mikel Arteta, I'm an Everton fan, so I do have a bit of a soft spot for Mikel Arteta. But we focus on the process, because if we keep doing the right things, if we display and we have the right behaviors more often than not, we'll be successful at some point. Whatever that success might be is irrelevant. And for my players, we talk about being honest, being committed. So if you're going to hit a ball, you hit it. You don't hesitate. You don't slow the racket down. You hit it. And I'm not bothered if it goes out, but you commit to every shot. You make a decision, action, and you just commit. Commit to your action. Don't worry about consequences, because what will be will be. And I focus on, let's miss. Let's make mistakes. And obviously, I don't want the player to make lots of mistakes. And to quote Rob Gray from the Perception Action podcast, about 70%. I want 70% success. I want some struggle. I want some success. 70% perfect. If they're not getting enough success, I'll manipulate the constraints. If they're getting too much success, I'll manipulate the constraints. I'll change it. I'll make it more demanding, or make it more attainable. But we're not focused on the outcome. We're definitely focused on the process. So just going to go through some comments off YouTube this week from various coaches. So if you are watching live, if you want to ask a question, please feel free. If you are watching on demand, please feel free to leave a comment. I'll try and reply on YouTube, but I may also reply on next week's stream as well. Have a quick sip of my coffee. Okay, here we go. So, first one. Hopefully you can read that. So, this was the one from, I did a video saying tennis is broken, and Alexander Mayer, who I Googled, and if it's the same person, was like top 4 ATP and very successful player many years ago. I think he's in his 70s now. I'm not too sure if it is him. Again, I'm not too sure if this person's just trolling me either, but I'll let you read it. So, tennis is broken. The requirements of becoming good in tennis involve self-motivation and endless practice. So my first sort of pushback there is, yes, I think tennis players do have to be motivated. You need that intrinsic motivation, definitely. Endless practice, I don't believe in endless practice whatsoever. I would rather players play tennis more than practice. And I did it on a podcast a few weeks ago with the LTA player pathway. 14 hours a week coaching is not healthy. It's not good. Like 14 hours of sport each week's good. I think that's really healthy. But I think you need to play tennis more than have practice. And a lot of coaches, again, their ego takes over and they believe that the more coaching players have, the better they'll get. So again, this guy's probably a pro player. So his bias, his belief is what worked for him. This is not the environment. This is not the environment parents create for their kids today. No, it's not, because it's not a healthy environment, Alex. And now you're modifying the necessary development skills to accommodate kids. Kids are kids. To be fair, that's a good point. Kids are kids. And I'm modifying the demands to suit the kids, to allow children to be children. It's not a case of we're making these into mini professionals. I don't think we should be drilling a 10-year-old. I don't think we'll be shouting, this is the level, to 10-year-olds, because we don't know what their level is. They are kids. Repetition is vital. So straight away, repetition is not vital. Tennis is the most unrepetitive game in the world. And this misconception of repetition is so embedded in tennis because of, again, outdated research. Fitz and Posner, 10,000 hours, and various other cognitive psychology books and quite outdated skill acquisition research. Tennis is highly variable. Tennis is not repetitive. You never play the same shot twice in a row. A pro player will never hit the same serve twice in a row in a match. There's always fluctuations. And again, there's a great comment on Instagram this week. Oh, the serve is a closed practice. No, it's not. The serve is a closed skill. It's not. It's an open skill, because you're taking information from your opponent's position, the weather, what court surface you're on, the score. You're using information, and that completely changes every single serve. That's not a closed skill. That's an open skill. So this whole mentality of repetition, it just blows my mind. Repetition is not vital. Repetition is harmful for humans. If you repeat the same action over and over again, you will injure yourself. That creates tennis elbow, because you're trying to you're trying to impose a rigid technique that doesn't suit your body. And because you go even more rigid, your body starts performing similar actions and starts injuring itself. The body needs variability. It needs variability to develop multiple different ways, because it doesn't store muscle memory as we believe it does. It needs to have experience of performing a wide range of multiple different skills, so it can organically just act based on what it sees in the environment. It doesn't just repeat an action. So repetition is vital, is ridiculous. So I'm finding it hard to read because I've got lights on as well. So again, you got some great survivorship bias here. I was among 4 players in my year in juniors. Loves to drop some names in there, so Connors and stuff. Top 10 juniors in the county. And this is one of the biggest problems with coaches who have played the game. Amazing knowledge, like unbelievable. Like I've never been a top tennis player. I never will be a top tennis player. Never played top 10 in the world. Never been top 10 in my country. Probably never even top 10 in my county. But coaching and playing are two completely different skills. Just because you've played the game doesn't mean you can coach it. Because what worked for this person, Alexander, will not work for me. It will not work for his players either. And he may have knowledge and experience of dealing with sort of some tough situations in matches. And like that thing I can never take away from a pro player. But in terms of teaching skill, generally speaking, pro players have no clue. And I used to work with a very successful player, and he used to say to me, oh, I don't know how to coach. I really don't know how to coach. I can't coach. I can't get the players to perform how I want them to do because they haven't got my skill. I said, that's the problem. Like, you have to meet them where they're at in terms of their skill developments. But what you can teach him is you can tell them the stories of how you dealt with certain situations, how you found success. So again, it's a pure survivorship bias. So for every Jimmy Connors who trained in Jimmy Connors' way, I'm using Connors because it's on the example. For every successful Connors, there's thousands of kids who trained the exact same number of hours, the exact same way, but didn't make it. So if repetition and these training methods work, why do so few players make it? And that's where you get, oh yeah, but Connors was mentally tough. Well, no, because you're all trained in the same way. So if the training is so important, if practice is so important, if repetition is so vital, why do so few players make it? That's what we call survivorship bias. We look at what the top players do and we believe that that's how you make it. We take away, well, hang on, if you look at Connors and look at how many hours of tennis he played rather than practice, I guarantee he's played more tennis than had tennis lessons in his life. So then he calls me an idiot. And again, the juniors I have produced speak volumes. And what tends to happen with this a lot is a successful ex-player. A lot of really talented juniors will go to that player. Why? Because they've got credibility. I'm not taking the credibility away from this person either. Like, they've got credibility. You've been top 10 in the world. You know how to make it. When they don't know how to make it. They made it, but I wouldn't say they know how they made it. Because again, they're not coaches. They're not sports psychologists. They're not skill acquisition experts. They're players who've gone through a system and they've made it, and fair play to them. So a lot of good players will go to those coaches in the belief that they can take them to the next level. And those players are generally already successful. So they'll get more success with that coach. And then what happens then is that coach looks like they've got lots of successful players then as well. So it must be the coach. So therefore, it just becomes even bigger survivorship bias and confirmation bias. But the coach didn't make those players. The players made themselves, but they're successful. They've gone with a coach. And then the coach is now taking success. There's a guy on Instagram, the Coaching Vault, and he's the worst for it. He's like, oh, I've produced all these players. You've been really lucky to have good players come to you. And my last point with this comment is, yeah, you have been successful and your players may have been successful. But imagine how successful you may have been, or imagine how successful your players could have been if you used more science and evidence-based methods. Because science and evidence shows us that the way I promote on this channel is more efficient and effective than basket drilling. It's more efficient and effective than high repetition. So imagine if you were to train that way, you might have been world number one. Your players might have been even more successful. And again, I got into a great conversation on LinkedIn. Like, there's no evidence to show that basket drilling makes you a top 10 player. There's no evidence to show that ecological dynamics will make you a top 10 player either. There is evidence to show that skill does not transfer very well from a basket drill. And there's lots of evidence to show that if you practice in a more representative way, like with ecological dynamics, more skill transfers. So yeah, I found that quite interesting, that comment. So I did reply to it. If you want to see my reply, head over to the video. So the second question, yeah, it was a great pickup from last week's podcast as well, because I talked about biological age and actual age and chronological age, and I got a little bit muddled up, to be honest, because it was the first live stream. I was using a brand new setup. I got a bit muddled up, and I remember thinking halfway through the stream, am I actually referencing the right thing here? I talk about biological age, but yeah, so just be careful. Biological age and chronicle age. A little bit of clarity on there. So thanks so much for that comment. I was aware of it after the stream, but yeah, thank you for your kind words and thank you for cleaning that up. And the last one that we're going to look at is I listened to your podcast in the car on the way to school pickup, parent, not coach. And that's great. I think it's great that parents listen and watch this podcast because a lot of parents only know what you know, and you put a lot of trust in tennis coaches. And there's a lot of good tennis coaches out there, but there's a lot of bad tennis coaches as well. So yeah, this is a channel for coaches and a lot of content is for coaches, but I think it's important parents watch as well. So I love the fact that you're a parent and listening in. I think it's dangerous to put too much emphasis on height and size. My daughter is very tall and has the body of a child 2 years older than her, but has the coordination skills of someone her own age. It's hard to coordinate the body of a 12-year-old when you have the coordination skills of a 10-year-old. I keep her at lower ball color as long as I can still use it, so you can learn to control the ball better before moving on to the next stage. And just generally because I don't see the rush. First and foremost, well done. Well done for not rushing through the ball colors. And I think it's great that you're allowing your daughter to stay at a ball color that she can meet the demands. The height and size of a player and their coordination, they're generally closely linked. What we find is players who have a growth spurt and they have a real quick period of development. It's not the fact that she's got the coordination of a 10-year-old. Her body's still recalibrating. Her body is trying to deal with the constant changes of the body size. So that's why it looks like she's got no coordination, because the body's still trying to work out how to use those extra long levers. And I've got a player that I work with at the minute who's an under 10 orange ball player, and he's really tall and athletic. He's got the body, I would say, of he's 9 at the moment. He's got a body of a 10, almost 11-year-old, really tall, really slim, athletic, really long limbs. And every now and then he'll come to session. I haven't this evening, funny enough. He'll come to a session and he looks like the most discoordinated player in the world. It's like he's never played tennis before. And what's happened is he's had a bit of a growth spurt. He's growing and his body is way out of sync. And you're right what you're doing now. It's okay, well, let's just use a slower ball today. Let's just understand that today's going to be a bit messy, but it's okay. Like I can't rush the body to work its way up. A bit like I said before, what I can do is help the body recalibrate. Let's hit the ball out. Let's hit the ball in the net. Let's hit the ball higher. Let's hit the ball lower. Let's hit wide. Let's hit down the center. Get him to hit in lots of different ways, and that will help the body start to self-organize itself again. But yeah, generally speaking, the height and stuff, it is linked in a little bit of coordination. But generally, if they're discoordinated, it means the body's playing catch up. It's not that the coordination is at a lower age. It's just the body is just growing far too quick. But I love the comment, and again, thanks so much for bringing that up. And that's about it. We're just pushing an hour. I've literally rabbit on. Thank you for everyone who joined me live. It's really, really appreciated. It'd be great to have some questions, some comments in the restream as well. Just going to move on to the next one. If you'd like to see how I develop all these skills, all these mental skills within sessions, please check out my From Drills Skills course. It's a online course. I show you how I coach with real life players in real life settings, how I couple mental skills into tactical and technical skills as well. There's a QR code there which you can scan, or head over to mytenniscoaching.com and look at my certifications. And yeah, if you do want to see me coach the way I coach, then that's a great starting point as well. And that's about it. Listen, I hope you've enjoyed the stream. Next week, we are going live again. If you have any sort of suggestions of what you'd like me to talk about in these live podcasts, please let me know in the comments, whether it be on YouTube or Spotify. If you are new to the channel, please consider liking and subscribing as well. And until next Monday, 10 a.m., make sure you give your players room to grow, allow them to develop their mental skills alongside their tennis tactical and technical skills. And until next time, I'll see you soon.